study into a comparative investigation into the visitor effects on captive species activity budgets and enclosure usage during and after the COVID-19 pandemic animal collection closures. So the project aims to analyse data collected through behavioural studies of rabbits, guinea pigs and chickens to assess whether visitor presence around an enclosure has a negative impact upon the selected species activity budgets and enclosure usage. The project's objective was to document behavioural and enclosure usage changes between the selected species during periods of visitor presence and absence. And the hypothesis was that the higher the level of visitor presence around an enclosure, the more of a negative impact the presence would have upon a species' activity budget and enclosure usage. The visitor effect is a term coined by Hosey, who described this as the effect visitors have on captured species merely by their presence around or near an enclosure. Visitors are a prominent factor within animal collections, with WASA reporting over 700 million people visiting their accredited sites annually. Visitors play an essential part in the daily running of animal collections, such as providing essential funds to keep the collection operating through entry fees and donations, participating or donating within conservation projects, engaging with educational material across the site, such as going to talks and displays, and raising awareness of the collection's missions and aims once they have left. So, human-animal relationships and human-animal interactions are important factors within a species welfare level and can have massive implications to the types of behaviours that we observe. These interactions and relationships are found across any site that has visitors, animals and people working close together. They can be found in farm, in research, in zoological collections, and even within our own pets. So the figure down below was created by Hosey, and this shows how a species' fear of humans can stem from interactions and relationships. If these interactions tend to be negative, such as being kicked and hit and slapped, then this in turn can result in negative relationships with both familiar and unfamiliar people, and this can result in high stress levels and fear and avoidance behaviours being displayed. Whereas if the relationship and interactions are mostly positive, such as being stroked and petted and spoken to softly, this can result in positive relationships with keepers and unfamiliar people, and the animals tend to have low fear levels, more confidence around people, and display less stereotypical behaviours. There are some animals in captivity that can't cope with high densities of visitors around an enclosure, and then this stress caused by the density can result in stereotypical and stress-related behaviours being displayed. This was found in Mitchell's research in 1991, where he found that intergroup aggression in a group of golden-bellied mangabeys increased when they were moved from an area of low visitor presence to an area of high visitor presence. This showed that this group could not cope with this change and that was very stressful to them. On the other hand, there are species that thrive with a large amount of visitor presence, and these are often observed performing behaviours that capture the visitor's attention, such as begging, making brief glances to gain public eye contact. This is observed quite a lot within ape species. Great apes, orangutans, gorillas do it, and smaller monkeys do it. And they will actively move to locations where visitors are to gain their attention and to receive interactions. Constant visitor presence suddenly being removed for a prolonged period of time due to the COVID closures of collections saw a change in the captive species' behaviours. Some species were observed to be hiding from staff, others were more active in their enclosures, and there were others that were actively seeking out humans. And if they saw a keeper, they would call to them to gain more attention. This was observed within species such as meerkats, some amphibians, and armour leopards, who showed an increase in their enclosure usage and a higher activity budget when visitors were absent, whilst other species such as the African penguin showed no behavioural changes during the closure period. Domestic species are also found in captivity. These species are more often found in petting zoos, which can be within zoological collections or can be standalone exhibits or standalone collections such as farm parks. Popular animals within these attractions are goats, sheep, rabbits, guinea pigs and chickens. That is because these species have been domesticated over time to become pets, become stock animals, so they're used to dealing with human presence. Although recent studies have found that goats and sheep had an increased level of FGM, which is a stress hormone, within their system during animal-visitor interactions when there was no retreat area present. This suggests that even though some species have been domesticated to deal with people, they would better benefit from having an option of choice to participate within these interactions or not. Other species, such as rabbits and guinea pigs, can habituate to being handled in visitor presence over time, which then reduces their FGM levels. So this interaction then becomes enriching for the species. Due to this, this project will now focus upon domesticated species, due to all previous research within this area being on captive wild species within zoos and some domesticated species within farm parks, but there isn't a great deal of research on the following three animals: rabbits, guinea pigs, and chickens, which will be the primary focus of this study. These animals were studied across two sites, Kingston Moor Animal Park and EMA, the Walled Gardens. These next few slides are going to give you an overview of the enclosures that the animals were kept in. They tended to have roughly the same amount of square footage. Guinea pigs at Kingston Moor had a hutch. They also had an old hutch that had been converted into a huge hide. There was a tunnel, and there was also a transparent hide, which the guinea pigs didn't seem to use. Whereas at EMA, they had a massive hutch. They had a warren area next to them, which then connected into more hides, and there was another hut closer to the front. The chicken enclosure at Kingston Moor was very barren. It just had a hutch. Whereas at EMA, the enclosure the chickens shared with another set of chickens and ducks, and that was because during the day they had access to the whole site, their free range, so they didn't need a lot within their enclosures. Rabbit enclosures across both sites were pretty similar. The one at Kingston Moor was the same size as their chicken enclosure. They had a hutch. Half of their enclosure was covered by a massive bush in the middle, and in turn this had further hides underneath. At EMA, the rabbit hutch was the same size as the guinea pig one. They had a massive warren area next to this and a sandpit which allowed them to express more natural behaviours. So primary data was collected through video recordings of these behaviour observations for 30-minute periods at a time. The data was collected over the two sites and focused primarily on the three species. Once this video data had been recorded, this was then watched back by the researcher, who then recorded all observations to their data record sheet and then transferred this to Excel spreadsheets. The results were compared across the two sites. Significance values were set at 0.05 and p-values were set at 0.01. The comparative tests for changes in enclosure usage and behaviour displays based on visitor density were run through a Wilks-Lamberter test on SPSS. Location preference tests per species based on visitor density were run through one-way ANOVA tests on Path 326B, and activity budget preference tests were run through the same test. These location preference tests and behaviour preference test results were then displayed by cluster column charts, which researchers created on Excel. These are results from the Wilks-Lamberters across all three animals: chickens, guinea pigs, rabbits. There's no statistical significant changes between these. So for further analysis, this was then run through the one-way ANOVA, and this highlighted some micro changes. Guinea pig behaviour, they seem to prefer more stationary behaviours when visitors were absent, and then more locomotory behaviours also when they were absent, but stationary were observed more when visitors were present, again, as were more observation behaviours. The location, they seem to prefer the front area when visitors were absent, and then preferring middle and the rear where hides were present when visitors were back. Chicken behaviour across both sides stayed the same, regardless with or without visitors. Locations, there is an anomaly within the chickens. Coop run is higher without visitors because this was during avian flu, so they were kept within this one area. But when visitors were let back in, they seemed to prefer the areas where visitors were present. Rabbits were very similar to guinea pigs with that. There was feeding, stationary, locomotory behaviours stayed relatively the same. Feeding increased slightly at Kingston Moor when visitors were back, but more stationary and observing behaviours were seen during visitor presence. This was also observed in their location, where they also preferred the front area when visitors were absent, and then preferring to be in the middle and rear locations where there were hides when visitors were reintroduced. In conclusion, animal-visitor relationships is hard to quantify due to most of the previous research in this area focusing primarily on animals within zoological collections and not domesticated species. This is also because there's been no previous research that had the ability to study the long-term effects of visitor absence due to there never being a situation quite like we saw on COVID. Changes in behaviour and enclosure usage in chickens across both sites suggest that there's neither a negative or positive impact from visitor presence, but it's leaning slightly more to positive due to the chickens actively seeking out these interactions. Enclosure usage and activity budgets for both rabbits and guinea pigs upon the return suggest that whilst that wasn't a negative impact, both species did display enclosure location preferences when visitors returned. If this research was to be repeated, I feel that it should be performed over a long period of time over a wider range of species to be able to allow more of an insight into the visitor effects on captive species dealing with visitor return, and that this research also suggests a need to reassess current animal enclosure designs, adding in hidden viewing areas for public and more hides for the animals, as that seems to have a more positive effect on captive species. If there are any questions after this presentation, please feel free to contact me with any questions that you may have via the methods below. Thank you for listening.